glad to be able to be with you here, even though it's early morning in Canada and afternoon for you. I'd like to give a special welcome to the people who were on the last Magic Egypt trip, who have come to Glastonbury for the conference. So delighted to be here, and thanks very much, Hugh. Okay, so here we go. Pyramid Code is a 5-part documentary series that's aired in 26 countries on TV, and there's several more deals on the table. And it's also available on Netflix. So let's just move straight into the presentation. Next. Okay, so what I want to do here is give a bit of a context for what I'm going to be talking about in terms of matriarchal cultures. Most of you may be familiar with the precession of the equinoxes cycle, and we go through several ages. The last age that we've been in lines up with the Mayan calendar, but the important part to notice is that there are ascending and descending ages, and we're at the darkest part of the Iron Age. And in my opinion, we're just about to turn the corner with 2012 to go back into the ascending cycle, and that's what's going to be fueling us with this new energy that could change the face of how our society has gone. And so you see the age of Aquarius and then the age of dogmatic beliefs, and we're in the Kali Yuga, which is the Iron Age, the descending age. But what I'd like to point out is the dynastic period of Egypt exactly parallels the Mayan calendar from 3113 BC through to 2012. And so there's something really significant about this period. I also think about it as the patriarchal period, 5,000 years of the denial of the sacred feminine, and I think it's gotten us into a lot of trouble. But if we keep going back, next please, through time, again from the right to the left, we see that most of the cultures that preceded the dynastic period of Egypt in the Mayan calendar were actually matriarchal cultures. And so one of the problems with looking at ancient Egypt is there's going to be the newer, the medium, and then the very old, and anything other than the dynastic period was matriarchal. And one more slide, and taking us through to cave drawings and the Magdalenian culture, the first alphabet, all the way through. And in this period of time, we've had several world floods, and that has prevented us from being able to see all of the evidence from the distant past, but it's nonetheless there. And it's at conferences like this that people each bring their own puzzle piece, and everybody's figuring out their own little bit, and this is the way that we can really put many of the pieces together. Next. So Egyptian history is actually quite limited in terms of where the story came from, and what we've been told isn't necessarily the whole picture. So if you can imagine a few people running around and science just, getting going, and archaeology becoming a science in 1910, and a lot of explorers, it's entirely reasonable that we could have been given a story about Egypt that's only part of the story. And indeed, it's coming from a patriarchal perspective. Next. And so there's one, this is a temple of Isis, an old picture. You can see it's just a scan of a picture in a book. But there's a temple of Isis that's located to the left of the Sphinx and down below, and now it's all cemented over. And so there's a road, and right in front of the Sphinx temple, there's been a whole lot of new cement put on. And so a lot of the routes that we would have been able to perhaps locate and find before have become inaccessible. And so there's a lot of evidence that has been erased, including inside the Great Pyramid and other sites. And so we really have to be piecing things together by getting hunches from our intuition, perhaps past life memories, and then grounding things in the field in reality. So a lot of the evidence has been erased. Next. So one of the most significant things that I cover in the Pyramid Code is the idea of the old riverbed shifting. And so when we're looking at the Giza Plateau and the network of passageways underneath the plateau, they used to fill with water. And so this picture is from the 1920s. And so even as recently as then, when the Nile would flood, the water would come quite close to the Great Pyramid that you see in the background. And so in recent times, in the last year and a half, the water has started trickling back up at the foot of the Sphinx. And they put all these sandbags there so that the water won't go close to the sound and light show seats. But nevertheless, the old riverbed is still in place. So that shifts our perspective also on what we've been told about Egypt. Next. What I'm going to do now is show you some details of the newly cleaned ceiling at the Temple of Dendera, which is very close to Nag Hammadi, where they found ancient Gnostic texts. The ceiling is about 40 feet high, and prior to this, I'll show you in one of the upcoming slides how it used to look. The ceiling was nearly black, and if you look at I hope you can see the details on this picture, you'll see a lot of female beings with stars above their head, and archetypal half animal, half human beings, snakes, and standing snakes, and a cobra on top of a sphinx, which is really a personification of a person. And it begs the question, what were the ancients actually showing us here? And anytime you see a snake, it's about immortality. If we're going to boil down what the ancients were really showing us, there were two things. They were looking at biology and how we got here, how we incarnated, and then cosmology, what happened when we departed. And so, to me, the ceiling of the Temple of Dendera is the entire cosmology of the ancients, and it's been sitting there hidden under a thick layer of black soot and mold. Next. And here you see the blackened section of just one part, and that's all we had before. Now you see a baboon to the right of it. Baboons in ancient history measure the passage of time. Apparently they pee every 12 hours, and the ancients weren't shy about animal functions. Above it, you'll see the zodiac, Sagittarius, and the crab on the right. And so in various places, and the ceiling is quite large, you'll see the cosmology. And here comes next the little icon. That's all we got to see before, and I find it interesting that they left one little blank spot there. So if it's 40 feet high and all we had was the outlines, it's very, very difficult to photograph at best. And these pictures were taken with an 18 megapixel camera, which allows me to be reading a little bit more detail. Next. On the far left-hand side, you see Isis is standing upside down with a band of stars and wings. And then you see a procession of solar boats on the bottom, and the Eye of Horus, and then a cast of characters and reptilian beings. Lots of snake energy on top, and lion-headed beings, snakes carrying offerings. And the seraphim, the highest level of angels, were known to be reptilian. And so we've heard a lot about the Anunnaki and the reptilian beings out there, and perhaps they weren't malevolent in times past. It could be that they were bringing some teachings, and it certainly seems that the ancient Egyptians weren't shy about this sort of energy. And so the solar boat has these lotus flowers on the end, but if we were to look at diagrams from quantum physics of wormholes, it's a similar pattern. And so to me, this is expressing a journey into other dimensional realms. And every time we see the Eye of Horus, it's sacred geometry, which is the pathway between the dimensions. But up on the top left corner, next please, I'm just going to blow up a feature in the corner, which is particularly interesting. We have the personification of a man. He's got 4 wings, 2 cobra heads, each with a feather, an ankh, which is a symbol of life in one hand, and a sail in the other. Now, deciphering this, to me, is the 4 quadrants of the 2,600-year cycle, roughly 6,500 each. And this is depicting passage through time, looking back into the ascending ages from before, and forward into the ascending ages, back into the descending ages, but the cycle keeps going around. And so this is the symbol. So the snake always represents immortality, solar boat, wormhole, Eye of Horus, sacred geometry. Next, please. Okay, so here we have a lion walking on a serpent and the scarab on the right-hand side at the bottom. And there are 5 different ages in the Egyptian tradition, but they're also represented in each day. And the dawn is the beginning of the cycle. Amun is the end of the cycle, which is darkness. And the point we are at in the Egyptian ages is at the end of the darkness, just coming back into the dawn. And so again, this is showing the passage of time and perhaps going through the age of Leo. It would appear with the lion. On the bottom left, you see what's a child is depicted in Egypt, often naked, thumb to the mouth, and a tuft of hair coming down off the side. And so the whole idea of childhood reincarnating the biology of coming back on the planet, the passage of time, the coming of a new age. Next, please. And so, I mean, it's just amazing to me how much is actually on this ceiling and how beautiful it is. In all the temples in Egypt, they choose 4 colors and repeat them throughout the temple. But what we have here on the steps are archetypes, and each of the male and female figures have the headdresses of various gods and goddesses, each of which are symbolic. What's interesting as well is in no tomb have they ever found any of these crowns. The interpretation of the double crown for Upper and Lower Egypt to me is not the issue at all. So what you have is the steps. An archetype is an energy, a consciousness that exists whether we are aware of it or not. We have internal archetypes and there's external archetypes here. And so to me, this is the cast of characters that's been depicted, each with their own qualitative features and marching up the scale here. So to me, this is a map of personality types, energetic fields, animal medicine, and various biological, cosmological, and physics cycles. Next. And on another small section here, we see the journey into the afterlife. Many of the symbols of the Catholic Church have been copied from ancient Egyptian cosmology, including what they have turned into as Judgment Day, where God comes and strikes you down if you weren't, and you go to hell if you didn't get it right. In ancient Egyptian cosmology, it is not an external person that comes, or God that comes to judge you. It is the judgment of the self. When a person passes from one incarnation into other dimensional realms, they are met by Anubis. On the right-hand side of this, the Eye of Horus at the end of the solar boat wormhole, are 4 personifications of Anubis, who is the jackal-headed god. He comes to meet you when you pass and says you're dead. And then they want your heart. They want to weigh your heart against the feather of truth. And then all of these, the seated figures above and below the Eye of Horus, are all holding a feather of truth. And they want to see if your heart is light. And they are the fair witnesses to you judging your own progress through the incarnation. And so how did you do on this? Now, inside the Eye of Horus, I think I have a blow-up of this. One next step, please. Yes. Inside the pupil of the Eye of Horus, which is all the Fibonacci sequence and the sacred geometry represented in here, which is the map to the other dimensional spheres, we have a child figure inside the eye. And so this is a precursor to coming back to the next incarnational cycle, evaluating the spiritual progress that has been made through this incarnation, and the fair witnesses. Now, they're actually holding a staff, I can see. I'm sorry, I thought it was a feather. The staff is a representation of the physical incarnation. And whenever you see a staff, the 2 points, it divides into 2 points, which is duality, and they never touch the ground, which means we are spiritual beings having an earth experience. And so this is very much a symbol of not only the evaluation of how the life has gone, but a preparation for the next life. Next, please. So now what we see is The zodiac is upside down. The star maps that the solar boat is going along the passage of time, you can see that blacked out space still upside down. But now what we see is the entirety of this storyline is contained within the body of Nui. And so her hands touch the ground, and if we were to look all the way left, we would see her feet touching the ground, and on either side of this first hypostyle hall at the Temple of Dendera, we see that the embodiment of the sacred cosmology is within her. And so this is a very different ideology and world myth than we have at present, and I'll develop that point as we move through this presentation. Next. So elsewhere at the Temple of Dendera, the ceiling has Nui, and you can see her hands are touching the ground. So she is the sky goddess, the great cosmic mother. She swallows the sun at night. It moves through her body and she gives birth to it during the day. And so what we see here is the rays of the sun emanating from her belly, from her womb. And what is depicted in the rays of the sun in the center of the picture is the goddess Hathor. And the whole temple is representing Hathor. But Hathor is the only being that gets temple pillars dedicated to her. Most temple pillars you see in the temples along the Nile are either lotus or papyrus, and then there's Hathor. So there's Hathor pillars at the Temple of Isis, and there's Hathor pillars at the Temple of Hathor. And so she is a very important goddess. And so as you see, the Egyptian cosmology is very strong in terms of the cosmic mother being feminine. Next, please. So here we see more cosmic cycles. There's some interesting points here, like on the top line, you see a lion-headed male figure. And again, as I mentioned, the staff of life doesn't quite touch the ground. It breaks into two forks at the bottom, which shows duality. This is the balance of the body and the symbol of the physical incarnation. And then you see perhaps a ram. I don't know what kind of animal that is, but if you look up close, and I do have magnification of this, there's a thymus gland right in the space where the thymus would go. And that's a symbol of procreation, and that's one of the symbols in the crown. So it's a white thymus within a red womb. And so the whole thing is about the cycles of procreation and the reverence of that. And as you go further along the right, you'll see the fish, which is like a passage through another age, the age of Pisces. Next, please. Just pointing out on the bottom here, there's two children being born out of a lotus flower. And I find that particularly interesting. And next, please, here comes the magnification. And so you can see a little bigger, the thymus imprinted. Now, this is not meant to be a crown. It's meant to be a symbol of procreation. But the thymus has everything to do with our consciousness. And it's the strongest and develops when we are youthful. And then as we lose our ability to procreate, the thymus activity also withdraws. And then you can see two seated children with the thumb pointed toward the mouth, naked, and coming out of a lotus. So the idea here is that we are born through the lotus. The lotus is a symbol of the sacred feminine. Papyrus, a symbol of the sacred masculine. These are actually papyrus flowers on the end of the solar boat. And again, all of the markings of the passage of time through the ages. Next, please. So here what we see is the goddess Seshet. She is coming from the stars. Above the star, coming out her crown chakra, are two cobras facing each other that almost encases this idea of the star. But what she's doing is she's making specific calculations. Again, I think from the passage of time, the cycle of the ages, which is heralding us that even though times have gotten as dark can be, we will turn the corner and rise back up, approaching a golden age. And that's what's of particular importance to us now as we approach 2012. But I find it interesting, if you look at her lower hand, part of the instrument that she's grasping has got a little lotus flower on it as well. So again, it's the connection to the sacred feminine, passage through time, circle of birth and death, and understanding these larger cycles and these incarnational patterns. Next, please. Here we have the Isis at the Temple of Abydos, beautiful colors. One of the things in the restoration in Egypt, they're not allowed adding color, but they are allowed to take off fungus and discoloration. And so these are particularly well preserved. One of the things looking at the cycle of dynastic Egypt is there were many matriarchal aspects from the distant past that percolated up in a few of the dynasties that allowed us to have a glimpse of times past. And so much of the dynastic period was warring, egos of the pharaohs, that sort of thing. But that's way after the Pyramid Age. The so-called Pyramid Age, I don't think lines up at all with when the pyramids would have been built. They would have come, perhaps had their last restoration during that time. And so what I want you to notice here is that Seti is holding a crook, which is a symbol of the balance of the emotions. There are two little staffs on either side coming out of Isis's hand. So flanking the symbol of life, she is putting the symbol of life to his nose, but also the Ankh is a symbol of fresh water, and the lotus blooms in fresh water, and that is actually the symbol for life. And when you see the hieroglyph for priest, he's the one, she, both priest and priestess, they're the ones who deal with the water. And the water was instrumental in terms of the energy machine, free power, on the Giza Plateau and in the pyramid fields with the honeycomb pattern of water underneath, water passageways. So you see how she is feeding him life. They're both wearing bands on their arms, wrists, and you would see bands on the ankles as well. And these are devices to hold the energy field strong while they are channeling huge amounts of cosmic energy. And the upper bands were symbolic of sex magic from the temples of Isis. So you see she's working with his energy field and feeding him. Next, please. So now we see the blue lotus flowers repeatedly over and over and over again, with the lotus flower stem wrapped around a wine bottle, a wine jar. And this was part of how they accessed other dimensions. There's been some research done on taking blue lotus flowers and soaking them in wine, and there are some psychotropic properties to that. So the symbol of the lotus is just everywhere you look in Egypt. And the idea is the feminine has to be in balance with the masculine, but the feminine principle somehow dominates just slightly, not in terms of control. So patriarchy has been about the denigration of the feminine and the control and domination by the masculine. In ancient Egypt, it just doesn't add up that way. Matriarchy is about the balance between the masculine and the feminine. It's about being able to access altered states. It's about the reverence for life and the sacredness of the balance between the masculine and the feminine. Next, please. So here, the papyrus is the symbol of the sacred masculine. So just to point out in this row of flowers, the variegated edge is the lotus, and you'll see that on temple pillars, and the smooth edge is the papyrus. And so, of course, the papyrus represents writing as well, and the masculine act of being able to keep track and keep records. But what this is symbolizing with the lotus stacked upon the papyrus is that both have to be present. Next, please. And so further to this, at the entrance to the Holy of Holies at the other Karnak that Howard was talking about in Luxor, the entrance to the Holy of Holies has two gorgeous pillars, one with lotus and one with papyrus. And you see various symbols of the sacred masculine in balance with the sacred feminine, which was absolutely important in order for the initiates to be able to do higher level spiritual work. You cannot leave one behind. It's representative of both sides of the brain, fully functioning human being, the masculine within a woman, the feminine within a man, everything balanced within everybody. And so there isn't such a discrepancy here between the genders or one getting denigrated. Next, please. So there are three levels of the symbols. The winged vulture is the feminine and the cobra is the masculine. Again, in every temple, as you walk to the entrance to the first hypostyle hall, you'll always see a winged disc. This is about again, the same thing. The snake is immortality, balance between the masculine and feminine. If you're entering the temple, you're dropping your ego at the door and you're moving in to do spiritual work. So the populace would go into the first hypostyle hall, and as the higher level initiates would gain levels of initiation, they were able to go further back into the temple to the Holy of Holies. But everywhere you see balance, balance, balance. Next, please. Now, another symbol for the masculine is the Jed pillar, which is said to be the spinal cord of Osiris. And here we see it as the personification of the masculine. You see it's tiny, but there's a solar disk at the top of the Jed, and two cobras, one wearing the crown, the red crown, which is the womb, and the second one wearing the white crown, which is the thymus. Again, symbols that you see over and over and over again. And so these are personifications of huge Kundalini energy. As you can see, it's very important to them by the depiction of the size of them being human size. And then on the right at the top, you see Nekbet, and these are her wings that are at the entrance to the temples. And she again is the symbol of the sacred feminine. One of the bird symbols is that a bird can walk on the ground and fly in the air, which is a depiction that we temporarily walk on the ground and then we go back into the astrals and to the other dimensional spheres. Next, please. What it is a row of two Jed and two what they call teats, which is an Ankh with arms to the side, and so two of each going along rows. And what this is the double feminine and the double masculine. And this is a very important construct that you don't hear many people talking about. And the idea is, in order to protect the soul, when the soul makes a passage to the other side, there has to be double strands of the masculine and feminine in order to protect the soul, to make a safe passage. Those of you who have been to the National Museum in Egypt, who've looked at King Tut's shrines, there was one box inside another, and the external one has this exact pattern. Two Jeds, two teats, two Jeds, two teats, and this was the safe passage. If anything was out of balance, the soul would not be able to make these passageways. And this is the same construct as when you die. If you're heavy of heart, they don't want you on the other side, and you get stuck in the lower astrals. And so all of these symbols were teaching the Egyptians how to live well and the importance of being able to bring their consciousness with them, the awareness, when they dropped one body, the physical body, and continued with the soul. So in Egypt, the Ka was the body double. So if you were to bilocate, one part of your Ka is in the other place, and the physical body is in the first place. But the Ba is the part of you that does not change when you lose this incarnation. And of course, Ra is the sun. So when they would say A, Ba, Ra, Ka, abracadabra, that was part of the magic. And so all of these things that I'm discussing is about having such high levels of consciousness that that people were able to move and do magic, transmutation of the atom. And these are the secrets that have been lost because we are at the most dark, dumbed down place we've ever been. So, of particular significance are the Nag Hammadi texts, and they were found in 1945 in an earthen jar. Guess where? A couple of miles down the road from Dendera. Now, they're similar to the Dead Sea Scrolls, and in that they are lost texts that when the Council of Nicene in 323 AD, Emperor Constantine came along and said, okay, we're outlawing reincarnation, we have one God, the feminine is being denigrated. All of the things that had to do with the sacred feminine and the Gnostic texts and that sort of thing had to be hidden. Anybody who hung on to these texts were, their life was in danger, and they were hidden. So in 1945, 13 single SQUIRE codices were found. And interestingly, they're written in the voice of a feminine divine power. And this is of particular significance. Next, please. When they were found, they were given to Christians who weren't necessarily mystics, and they were translated. It took them 21 years to translate them. And of course, having a PhD in linguistics, I understand it's not that easy to translate a quote-unquote dead language, but if you make small mistakes with prepositions, verb tenses, masculine and feminine pronouns, you can get a completely different story. So when the publication of the Nag Hammadi texts was produced, it just really didn't resonate with what it was supposed to. So a few people, notably John Lamb Lash, came forward and gave us another view of what it is, and I will continue with this idea. But if you're looking at the map now, you can see at the bend of the Nile that Nag Hammadi and Dendera are very close, and on the bus when we were on the last Egypt trip, we drove right past Nag Hammadi, and most people don't know what these texts are and what the significance is of them, but basically they're holding a completely different cultural myth. And that's of great significance to us in our times, because the lack of feminine consciousness is part of what's gotten us into trouble in this day and age. Next, please. So, interestingly, here we are in Glastonbury, and The Myths of Avalon is a book by Marion Zimmer Bradley that is the remnants of the goddess tradition, talking about how being in tune with nature and connecting with the goddess through growing plants and seeds and through observing solstices and equinoxes and connecting to these cosmic cycles at the stone circles, the transmutation of the atom, being able to work with earth, air, fire, water, literally being able to psychically look into scrying bowls and have visions, and all of these things that have been denigrated were very active in those times. It's since been made into a movie that is quite fantastic that follows the book. And of course, Avalon was right next door to Glastonbury, and it disappeared into the mists of time. However, somewhere at the cellular level, somewhere it's been preserved, in the goddess-centered traditions in the distant past. Now, it's my conviction that it's been the agenda of the patriarchy to erase evidence of everything other than itself. But in the research that I did for my book, Angels and Archetypes, An Evolutionary Map of Feminine Consciousness, there are little fragments that exist if we know how to put the puzzle pieces together. So now, with internet and the democratization of information, we do have access to this information, and it's resurging in us naturally. The end of the patriarchy, to me, is signified by 2012. The galactic alignment that occurs from my calculations through Starry Night Pro. There's lots of people saying October 28th, 2011, and all different dates. But you can move 99,000 years BC, 99,000 years AD, and see that this galactic alignment only occurs at sunset, December 21st, 2012, is the exact alignment. However, we've reached, every time we go through solstice, winter solstice in the northern hemisphere since 2008, we have been touching that energy every year. Next, please. So what we need to do here is, I think, replace the cultural myth. So we've been taught that it's an angry God with a thunderbolt that's going to strike us down if we're not perfect, and that we have to have faith in him, and then the judgment comes from him. In the Nag Hammadi texts, the supreme creator is Gaia Sophia, who is the embodiment of the earth herself, and it's interactive. So she has faith in us. And I think that is absolutely where it's at. So when we go into nature and commune with Gaia Sophia, we have an opportunity to be co-creators. And that is what's being signified again by the coming of the new era after 2012. And many psychics are unable to look into the future because it hasn't been decided, and we need to drop the shackles of the system that is enslaving us and allow ourselves to connect with nature and get closer to it. So this is the opportunity. So after the last Egypt trip, next please. I call this the Holy Grail of the Sacred Feminine. It's a spinning plasma being. I don't want to say that I know what this is. I did notice this. I'm going to move through the slides if you can just keep going there. What we see is a spinning energy that starts to look like a chalice. You can see that it actually is alive in that obviously it's going around. I'm moving through these pictures. This is during the Sound and Light show. These pictures have been cleared from the idea of it being a lens flare, because of the cross quarter points that you look at do not add up to where the light was coming from, but also this grail is moving across the pyramids and becomes quite bright. And so what we were told, the idea of 10-10-10 and being in the Great Pyramid, was it was the reestablishment of the sacred feminine in balance with the masculine, that in the Mayan calendar, just before we entered the ninth wave, the idea was that anything that was not supporting a balance between the genders would not be supported anymore. And so this whole idea of the resurgence of the feminine, to me, was represented in this incredible apparition. William Henry talks about plasma beings going back into the center of the galaxy. And this, to me, is that sort of energy. And I will just continue, if you keep going to the next slide, with green apparitions. The day before this, there was a different style of apparition, these green orbs. We've seen lots and lots of, well, I don't know if you call that an orb or not. We've seen lots of orbs in our pictures, depending on whether we're inside the Great Pyramid. The beings seem to like to present themselves when there is toning, singing, sacred sights, joy, dancing, and our pictures have been loaded with orbs, increasingly complex, geometric shapes. But these, if you keep going next, these green ones obviously look like they're flying through space and just moving around the pyramids, and then at last ending totally around the capstone of the second pyramid behind the Sphinx. And so I'm not going to claim that I know what these images are. They exist in a way that can be perceived with the naked eye, but perhaps are enhanced with a camera. And I think that it signifies that we're moving into a completely different time and space, where it's important to embrace the sacred feminine, whether we're men or women. And this, to me, will be the key to us coming through a lot of the issues that have been about repression, hierarchy, violence, and essentially blood from death instead of blood from life. And in matriarchal cultures, the highest form of DNA is menstrual blood, and they used it to fertilize and to grow things. And so it was about procreation. It's what gave the ability for us to give life. When the patriarchy took over, they started using sacrificial lambs. They were still wearing the tall hats and the red, white, and black, and the priestess robes, and the priests started wearing them, and they still do. The popes and the cardinals, they're still wearing the Virgin Mother crone colors, red, white, and black. White for the Virgin, red for the Mother, black for the crone. But then they used blood sacrifice. So even the Mayans went to that. They started using blood sacrifice. So as soon as you see blood from death, that's patriarchal. But everything before it was the respect of blood for life. Now, another thing that you'll see in the pyramid code is that the casing stones on the Great Pyramid were white. The second pyramid, they're obviously red. And there's evidence that the third pyramid was black. And so you see that again repeated as Dashur, where there literally is a red pyramid. The bent pyramid is white, and the black pyramid is the damaged one. And so this red, white, and black speaks to the idea that in the distant past, long before the so-called pyramid age, the pyramids could have been there in a completely different era and epoch from when the temples along the Nile were built, but it was very definitely an honoring of the great cosmic mother, high focus on feminine energy, always in balance with the masculine, and matriarchal, not in an opposite way of patriarchy where the women would control the men, but in an insistence on balance. Now, the other feature of the the matriarchy was that leadership was not given any profit. People would have a leadership position for a limited amount of time. They'd be given their robe and their lunch, the privilege of leading, and that was it. And so in our day and age, getting profit for leading and corruption, and if you don't get caught, it's not wrong, has gotten us into a good deal of problems on the planet. And so to me, restoring these ideas from the ancient past gives us some light and hope that we can move into the future. And if we replace the cultural myth to what it used to be, that the goddess was actually the feminine, then I think that we have a chance of turning things around. And also, each of us is evolving. We're moving into 12-strand DNA. We've been dumbed down to 2. We're increasing DNA from 3 to 6 to 9 to 12 strands, which is what the ancients had in the Golden Age, which allowed them to do magic, which made them psychic, which made them connect the dots, have insights. And it's forums such as this, where people get together and share their knowledge, and we're all coming up with pieces and a sense of deep knowing. I think that's going to be our salvation. So with that, I will stop, and thank you very much for the opportunity.